Make some noise, Black family. How's everybody doing tonight? Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I want to thank Brother Garfield and his fraternity, the good brothers there in the Latino fraternity, for making this happen and getting me here to Pace University, Pleasantville campus. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Umar Ifatunde Oguntade. I'm a doctor of clinical psychology, which I earned from the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. I'm a certified school psychologist, studies completed at Millersville University in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where I also earned both of my undergraduate degrees in psychology and political science. Lehigh University is where I did my principal work, getting my master's in educational leadership there. Lehigh University, getting my master's in educational leadership there, and a third master's degree while at PCOM as well in clinical psychology. So 6 degrees, 3 universities, and I'm contemplating doing something I never thought I would do again, and that was go back to the classroom to get a law degree, because we don't have a major Black educational attorney in the United States. So in my expertise as a school psychologist fighting against the misdiagnosing of our African children, and when I speak of African tonight, I'm speaking inclusively and pan-Africanistically of all members of the African family. So when I say African, I'm talking about my Puerto Rican Africans, my Cuban Africans, my Dominican Africans, my Belizean Africans, my Venezuelan Africans. All African people are included whenever I open my mouth, because I am a pan-Africanist. And so when I speak of saving African children, I'm talking about the brown ones too, but I don't have to say brown because they're already a member of the Black family. And so we have too many of our boys, whether they're a Spanish-speaking African or an English-speaking African or a immigrant African, too many of our African children are being labeled as retarded and intellectually disabled and reading and math disabled and ADHD and conduct disorder and autistic and emotionally disturbed and this and that and this and that, when the true problem is that they simply have not been taught in the first place. And so for those of you who are here who are parents, please make sure you fight back and push back against the over-medicalization, the over-evaluation, the over-special education of our brown and Black African boys, our Spanish-speaking African children, as well as our English-speaking African children, and all in between. Before I leave, I'm going to make sure you have my number in case you want to reach out to me. I have this dream of mine where I want to speak in every African community in the world before I go back to the ancestors, and I've been to every continent. Yesterday, I just got back from visiting our brothers and sisters in Curacao, as well as Aruba and Bonaire. And of course, on the 20th of next month, I'll go to South Africa and then Ethiopia, Addis Ababa for African Liberation Day. But I haven't been to Cuba yet, which is the home of my paternal great-grandfather, Cicero Noel Miles, who I met not long before he transitioned to join the ancestors. He was a Spanish-speaking Cuban from Havana. So I do have some Latino African heritage in my blood. With that being said, I want to go directly into the challenges that we have. And these challenges that we have as African people are not limited to the Spanish-speaking African or the Latino African or the continental African or the American African here in the 50 states. Those of us who are the offspring of the victims of the worst human tragedy in recorded history. We have a lot of schisms amongst us. a lot of isms. We got light skin supremacy problems. We got dark skin supremacy problems. We got English language speaking supremacy problems. We got Spanish speaking language supremacy problems. And what's ironic about them all is, or what I find to be so interesting, is that as African people in the diaspora, we tend to focus more on where the slave ship brought our ancestors as opposed to where the slave ship picked them up from. There was no place called America 400 years ago. There was no place called Puerto Rico 400 years ago. There was no New York City, Philadelphia, LA, Oakland. There was no Colombia, Venezuela. There was no Dominican Republic. Those names come later. What were you before Puerto Rico was called Puerto Rico? What were you before New York City was called New York City? What were you before Cuba was called Cuba? You were an African. All of us were. But in our sojourn across the world, the white power structure played a game that it still plays amongst African people today, and that is the game of divide and conquer and separate and rule. And they put the light against the dark, no matter what the language was. They put the Latino against the American African. They put the continental African against us. They put the Caribbean African against each other. Our brothers and sisters in Australia, they made us think we had far less in common than we actually do, exploiting superficial differences. And what makes it so interesting is the very person you don't like because they speak another language or have a different complexion or their hair texture is a little different from yours may very well be your cousin. Y'all may very well come from the same traditional African kingdom. Y'all might both be Yoruba. Y'all might both be Igbo. Y'all might both be Maasai. Y'all might both be Zulu. You might both be Swazi. You might both be Khoi. You might both be Xhosa. Look how ridiculous we are as African people to be fighting each other when truth of the matter is we may all have very well come from the very same village, our ancestors that is. So we have to get over it, and we have to get over it quick. One of the things I always talk about when I'm dealing with pan-Africanism is to make sure people understand what pan-Africanism is and what pan-Africanism is not. And I'm going to go into that right now. Pan-Africanism is the black man's oldest formal political ideology. Some people would trace its birth to the Haitian Revolution, which began on my birthday, August the 21st, but many years before I was born in 1791. Some people would trace Pan-Africanism to the Chicago Conference on Africa that took place in 1893, I want to say it was. Some people would trace Pan-Africanism to other events. I would say Pan-Africanism is as old as Africa because we are the first people to circumnavigate the planet. We were the only people on the planet all by ourselves for at least 250,000 years. Nobody else. If we don't leave Africa, white people never evolve. If we don't leave Africa, Chinese never evolve. If we don't leave Africa, you never get an East Indian, you never get a Native American. The African is the mother and father of all human groups. Those groups come from us. They are in our DNA. And this is indisputable now. We've had the Harvard Genome Project. We've had all kinds of research, black and white research, that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Africa is the cradle of civilization, that the black woman is the mother of all civilization, and the black man is the father of all civilization. There is no humanity without us. Every group on the planet comes from us. We're the only people who came from God. Everybody else came from us. Which is interesting because when you get into the religious conversations, and as Pan-Africanists, we don't take no issue with religion. We believe in freedom of worship. I don't care if you're a Hebrew, I don't care if you're a Christian, I don't care if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, a Jehovah's Witness, a Muslim. It makes no difference to me. Your religion is only my concern to the extent that it interferes with your ability to struggle for African liberation. If your Christianity does not stop you from struggling for African liberation, I have no issue with your Christianity. If your Islam does not stop you from struggling for African liberation, I have no issue with your Islam. If you being a Jehovah's Witness or a Methodist or an Episcopalian doesn't stop you from struggling for African liberation, I have no issue with you. But on the flip side, if you say you cannot struggle for African liberation because your God doesn't allow you to see color, we have a problem. I can't struggle with you. If you tell me you can't work with other African people because they haven't been saved, or they haven't taken their shahada, or they haven't undergone a particular religious experience, if you say you have to be of my own belief in order for me to struggle with you, I have a problem, because now your religion just became the enemy of African liberation. And let us be real clear. No weapon has been greener. No weapon has been used more against African people at home, which is Africa, and abroad in the diaspora, than religion. It has been used to make us inferior. It has been used to brainwash us against who our true enemies are. It has been used to make us adopt a politically ridiculous colorblind agenda. How can you afford to not see color when you've been victimized by your race your entire experience outside of the diaspora? Who benefits by African people not seeing color? Who benefits by you not putting African people first? Always ask yourself that question when somebody gives you any set of circumstances. Who benefits from this? When a European came into Africa, he had the Bible, we had all the resources. By the time he left, he controlled all the resources and we had the Bible. Napoleon Bonaparte, and I'm no fan of his, of course he lost in the Haitian Revolution to Toussaint L'Ouverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines. And Napoleon said, religion is what keeps the poor man from killing the rich one. I'm not against religion, but your religion must be an instrument of liberation, or it is a waste of time. I was raised Muslim and Christian, so I know all about the church, I know all about the masjid. And if I'm going to be plainly honest with you, there's no religion on the face of the earth that serves African liberation. And you cannot be a pan-Africanist if you still got that white Jesus hanging up in your house, in your dorm room, in your car, or in your Bible. Because before we can liberate ourselves politically, before we can liberate ourselves economically, before we can liberate ourselves socially, before we can liberate ourselves culturally, we have to liberate ourselves psychologically. I want you to hear me well, Puerto Rican Africans. I want you to hear me well, American Africans. I want you to hear me well, all my Latino Africans, my continental Africans, my American Africans. There is no liberation for our race that does not begin with psychological liberation until you change the way that you think about yourself, your people, and your future. Until you change the way that you think about who we are, and what we must become, you change nothing else about us. Reparations is a hot topic right now, ain't it? Everybody's talking about reparations this like it's some new thing. Reparations grew out of the pan-Africanist movement. It was pan-Africanism that gave birth to reparations, not YouTube or the YouTube opportunists. It was pan-Africanists who gave birth to reparations. But guess what? The US government can give us $1 trillion. The French government can give us $1 trillion. The Italian government, the German government, the Belgian government, they can give us $1 trillion. But guess what? Without psychological liberation, I don't care how much money you get from the outside, until you change the dynamic in the inside, nothing else will change. That's why the most honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, who gave us the red, black, and green flag in the largest black movement in modern history, Mr. Garvey said, don't take the kinks out of your hair, black sister, take the kinks out of your mind. I'm gonna get to the weaves and perms later. Because we cannot expect little black girls to grow up with pride. We cannot expect little black girls to grow up with self-respect while adult black women imitate Caucasians. Now, some of you have naturally curly hair. No problem with that. Some of you have naturally straight hair. No problem with that. We We got African brothers and sisters in New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, in the South Pacific. They're naturally blind, and they have naturally blue eyes. Some of our Puerto Rican African brothers and sisters got green and blue, and our Cuban brothers and sisters and Dominican brothers and sisters got green and blue. I got nieces and nephews who got green and blue eyes. So that's not the issue. If that's your natural color, so be it. But for those of you who have the original ancient skin color and the original ancient hair color and the original ancient hair texture and the original ancient phenotype of our great-grand ancestors on the Nile Valley of Africa, why would you dare snuff that out? Why would you dare kill the greatness in your DNA? One of the greatest victories of white supremacy is that it made black people want to imitate their oppressor. And most of us now still want to imitate our oppressor. And every last one of you in here right now, I don't care if you speak English, Spanish, Portuguese. I don't care if you speak Wolof or Swahili. Every last one of you, after you graduate from Pace University, after you get your bachelor's and your master's and your doctorate, you are either going to be a benefit to African people or a detriment to African people. You will either be a plus for your people or you will be a minus. You will either be a freedom fighter for African people or you will be a part of the coonocracy. Some of you can't wait to join the coonocracy. Some of you go to sleep dreaming of being a coon. You can't wait for the white power structure to draft you and offer you a job to sell out your people. You got coons all over the world. You got Ghanaian coons, you got New York City coons, you got Puerto Rican coons. You got all kind of African people selling out their people around the world. But let me get back to what Pan-Africanism is. Point number one, and these are in no particular order. I will be authoring a book on the principles of Pan-Africanism because we need that. Number one, all African people are one family. All African people are one family. Whether you are in Puerto Rico speaking Spanish, whether you are in Senegal speaking Wolof, whether you in South Africa speaking Zulu, whether you are in Kenya speaking Maasai, whether you are in Brazil, the largest African community outside of the continent is Brazil. They speak Portuguese. It doesn't matter where you are, whether you got the straight hair or the curly hair or the nappy hair. Whether you got the blue, black, purple, beautiful skin of our ancient grand ancestors, or whether you have light skin, whether you are Muslim or Christian, whether you pledge allegiance to this flag or that flag, we are one African people. We are one African family. We are one African race. Now here's the kicker for Pan-Africanists. We identify as being African before anything else. Nothing supersedes your Africanity. You're never a Christian who happens to be an African. You're an African who happens to be a Christian. You're never a Muslim who happens to be an African. You're an African who happens to be a Muslim. You're never a Puerto Rican who happens to have some African DNA. You're an African who happens to be a Puerto Rican. Why? Africa existed before Jesus existed. Africa existed before Muhammad existed. Africa existed before the Dominican Republic existed. Africa existed before any country you pledge your loyalty to, any religion you belong to, any language you speak. Africa is older than that. Your race is the only thing you belong to that God chose for you. Everything else you belong to, you chose or your parents chose. You Christian, you love your religion, nothing wrong with that. But you could leave the church tomorrow. You Muslim, you love your religion, nothing wrong with that. You could leave the mosque tomorrow. Your fraternities, your sororities, you can leave them tomorrow. Your professional affiliations, you can leave them tomorrow. Your nationality, you can denounce it tomorrow. Your language, you can change it tomorrow. What is the one thing you belong to, chosen by God, fixed at birth, that you have no control over, and that is your Africanity. And that's why we identify as African family first. I'm giving you this Because too many people walking around call themselves Pan-Africanists who really are not. If you don't put the race first, you are not a Pan-Africanist. Pan-Africanism means all of us are one. So that means if you like to practice petty tribalism, if you like to put the American African above the Caribbean African, if you think you better because you're from America and somebody else is from Australia, that's not Pan-Africanism. You think you better because you light skin and somebody dark, that's not Pan-Africanism. You think you better because you belong to this religion and they belong to that religion, or your hair is straight and their hair is curly. Any tribalism in your blood prevents you from being a Pan-Africanist. That's a hypocrite. When I go to Africa, the first thing I tell my brothers and sisters, when I'm in Nigeria, I say, listen, I know we got issues here. There was a civil war between the Igbo and the Yoruba. I understand that. But when Dr. Umar is in Lagos, when Dr. Umar is in Port Harcourt, when Dr. Umar is in Enugu State, when I'm in Ogun State, we are all African people here. I don't care which family you come from. When I'm in the Caribbean islands, and I get the petty conflicts in there, I don't care if you Bahamas or Bermuda, while I'm here, we African. I don't care if you Jamaican or Haitian, while I'm here, we African. I don't care if you Dominican, Cuban, or Puerto Rican, while I'm here, we are African. And guess what? There was no benefit to slavery, but I will tell you this. Given that we are the diasporan African, which means we're mixed with the blood of every African nation on the continent, when we go back to Africa, we are the peacekeepers. See, when I sit at the table in Africa, they don't have to worry about whether I'm going to take the side of the Wolof or the side of the Mandingo. When I'm in the Caribbean islands, they don't have to worry about, is he going to side with the Puerto Ricans or the Dominicans? I'm mixed with everything, and as a result of that, I am impartial. They can trust me to facilitate that session. There's a benefit to being Pan-African. So number one, we identify as African. And let me say this, we are not racist. I want white people to get all the blessings God has in store for them. I want red people to get all the blessings God got in store for them. I want yellow people to get all the blessings God got in store for them. I want non-African brown people to get all the blessings God has in store for them. We are not interested in oppressing nobody, but we claim the continent of Africa for ourselves. And nobody in Africa who is not an African can be called so. If you are in Africa and you are not an African, you are either an invader, a colonizer, or the descendant of one. No Chinese can call himself African. No Arab can call himself African. No East Indian can call himself African. Why? Because Africa is the land of black African people. I can't go to China and call myself Chinese. So why can he come in Africa and call himself an African? I can't go to East India and call myself an Indian. So why can they come to Africa and call themselves Africans? And let us be clear. The only reason why the other human races want to come into Africa and claim that they're African too is so they receive no opposition as they go about the continent pillaging resources and stealing the mineral wealth of Mother Africa. Let us be very clear about that. I've been to China. China is very racist against African people. Very racist against African people. But yet they'll come into Africa and say, I'm an African. No, you're not. You are an opportunist. You have to learn how to think deeply and politically, because to be a Pan-Africanist, you have to be what? A statesman, a stateswoman for the African race. Yes, you should be involved in the politics of New York if you're a New Yorker. Yes, you should be involved in the politics of Texas if you are a Texan. Yes, you should be involved in the politics of California if you're a Californian. Yes, you should be involved in the politics of Puerto Rico if you're a Puerto Rican. Yes, you should be involved in the politics of Haiti if you're Haitian. But on top of your national loyalty must be your racial consciousness. See, let me explain something to y'all. White people don't all get along. I know this because I work with them. Some Jews think they better than Italians. Some Italians think they better than the Irish. Some Irish think they better than the Greeks. Some Greeks think they're better than the Anglo-Saxons. But when it comes to doing what? Making sure white folks control the economics of the planet, they stop fighting long enough to keep raping Africa, and then they go back to fighting after they take care of the business of the white race. Pakistanis don't always get along with the Indians. They got issues, but when it comes to the best interests of the Indian people, they work it out. Iraqis don't necessarily like the Kuwaitis. The Kuwaitis don't necessarily like the Iranians. But guess what? When it comes to the best interests of the Arab people, they stop the petty beef until they take care of the business of the race. Chinese don't necessarily like Japanese, and Japanese don't necessarily like Cambodians, and Cambodians don't necessarily get along with the Vietnamese. But when it comes to the best interests of Asian people, they stop the fighting long enough to take care of the business of the Asian race. There's only one race on the planet who can't stop fighting long enough to get their act together, and that's us, African people. The most honorable Marcus Garvey said we were cursed with petty differences. If black people don't have a reason to fight, we'll make one up. Skin color, language, education, light skin, dark skin, Muslim, Christian, curly hair, straight hair, Spanish, English. And the white power structure laughing at all of us. Because everybody needs to understand this, and this is my second point of Pan-Africanism. And Brother Garfield, keep me posted on the time. I'm going to keep going. Give me like a 10-minute, because I catch the African Holy Ghost real quick. The second point, and you better get this, because people always ask the question, why are we worried about Africa? We got problems in New York City. While I'm worried about Africa, I got problems in the Dominican Republic. What am I worried about Africa for? I got problems in Venezuela. The black community in Colombia got problems. Panama blacks got big problems. We got Africans in Mexico, big problems. Why am I worrying about Africa for? 20,000 miles away. What good is that for me? You know why? Because as Africa goes, so goes all African people. I've been all over the world, brothers and sisters. And guess what I've learned? Wherever I go, European Jews are respected. Wherever I go, European Jews got power. You know why? Because Israel is respected and Israel got power. Wherever I go, Chinese are respected. Chinese are in an economic power position. Chinese are always upheld and treated with respect and